You know that feeling when you look at a piece of art or an old building or even a piece of jewelry and you just get a sense that it's trying to tell you something? The world all around us is actually speaking a kind of hidden language, not with words, but with shapes and lines and forms.
So, let's just dive right into that idea. What if all those intricate patterns we see every day weren't just there to look pretty? What if they were an actual message? A story just waiting for someone, for you, to read it? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to learn to read this universal visual language.
You see, any creative work, it isn't just a thing. It's an idea that's been given a physical form. And these ideas get communicated through a kind of visual vocabulary. And once you learn to spot the words, the shapes, the forms, you can start to see the deeper meaning that's hiding in plain sight.
All right, so if we're going to read this language, we have to start with the absolute basics. We need to learn its alphabet. We're going back to the fundamental building blocks that all visual communication is made from.
So our very first letter is the point. It's the simplest thing you can possibly imagine. Just a single spot in space. But don't let that fool you. Symbolically, this thing is huge. Think of it as the big bang of design, The origin point, the central nucleus that everything else springs from.
So what happens when you have 2 points? Well, you connect them. And just like that, you've got a line. And with that line, we've just introduced the number 2, and this really core idea of duality. Suddenly, it's not just one thing anymore, it's this and that. We can see a distance, a relationship between them.
And check out what happens with just a simple rotation. A horizontal line, it feels passive, calm, right? Like the horizon at sunset. But flip it vertically and suddenly it's active, it's strong. It's a tree reaching for the sky, connecting the earth to the heavens. That's duality right there in action.
Okay, so what happens when 2 of those lines meet at a point? They make an angle. And this brings us to the number 3, what's called the ternary. Now, this is where things get really interesting symbolically. If the number 2 represents that tension between opposites, the number 3 is often seen as the resolution. It's a third element that creates a brand new, stable relationship. All right, we've got our ABCs down. The point, the line, the angle. Now it's time to start forming our first words. We're moving from the basic letters of our visual language into the actual shapes and solids they create.
And our very first word is the triangle. It's what you get when you connect 3 points. And it's born right out of that idea of the angle we just talked about. And what's amazing about it is its perfect consistency. It doesn't matter if it's tall and skinny or short and wide. Its inside angles always add up to 180 degrees. That's a foundation of pure mathematical certainty right there.
But the symbolism is where it really comes alive. Pointing up, it often represents action, the spirit, and in a lot of faiths, the Holy Trinity. But just flip it over with the point facing down, and it becomes this incredibly powerful symbol for the feminine, for water, and for life itself. So from 3, we're going to move on to 4, the square. It's perfectly balanced, 4 equal sides, 4 perfect right angles. This brings in the idea of the quaternary, which is a fancy word for a pattern of 4 that, I promise, you're going to start noticing everywhere in the world around you. And that's because the square is so deeply connected to our material world. Think about it. The 4 seasons, the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 ancient elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Its solid, balanced structure just makes it the perfect symbol for stability, for reality, for all the tangible things in our lives. Now, when we take that stability of the square and we pull it out into 3 dimensions, we get the cube, a regular solid with 6 of those equal square faces. And if the square is stable, the cube is basically the embodiment of that idea. It can't rotate or roll on its own, it's solid. And this is just a brilliant illustration of how the most solid-seeming forms start out as a simple, 2-dimensional idea. You just start with this flat pattern, you cut it out, and then with a few simple folds, boom! You've created a perfect 3-dimensional object. It's actually a beautiful metaphor for how things are created, isn't it? So far, we've been all about points and lines and sharp angles. But now, we're going to shift gears. Let's explore a whole different kind of expression, the fluid, the dynamic, the absolute poetry of the curve. And that brings us to the circle. It might look simple, but wow! Symbolically, this is one of the most powerful shapes there is. It has no beginning and no end, which makes it the perfect symbol for eternity, for wholeness, for the universe itself. Every single point on its edge is perfectly the same distance from the center. It's pure unity. Now let's take that perfect circle and give it some volume. What do you get?
You get the sphere. It embodies all that amazing symbolism of the circle, wholeness, unity, eternity, and it makes it real, something you could hold. This is the form of perfection, which is probably why we see it in the heavens, the sun, the moon, the planet.
Okay, our final shape isn't static at all. In fact, it's pure energy in motion, the spiral. This is the shape of growth, of evolution. And you can see it absolutely everywhere in nature, from the way a little fern unfurls, to the structure of a seashell, all the way up to the magnificent swirling arms of a galaxy. It's like the visual signature of life's dynamic energy.
So, we've learned the alphabet, and we've learned some basic words. Now, it's time to understand the grammar. Let's take a look at the rules and principles that govern how these shapes and forms interact with each other to create even more complex meanings.
A perfect example of this grammar in action is contrast, and there is no better symbol for it than the yin-yang. This isn't about a conflict, it's about a perfect dynamic dance. You've got the active light principle of yang and the passive dark principle of yin. But notice those little dots? That's to show that there's always a little bit of each inside the other. It's the ultimate symbol of balance. Another huge principle is symmetry, and really it's just balance that's created by a mirror image. You see it in a butterfly's wings, you see it in the human body, you see it in a reflection on a lake. And that reflection creates this sense of order and harmony that our brains just naturally find really pleasing. We also communicate through repetition. By repeating a shape over and over again, you can create a kind of visual beat, a rhythm that gives the whole design a pattern and a sense of unity. Think about the tiles on a floor or the links in a chain. Repetition gives things structure, and it turns a bunch of individual parts into one cohesive whole. And you know, this really gets to the heart of everything we've talked about. If we only see these shapes for how they look on the surface, as just decoration, we are missing most of the story. But when you start to understand their symbolism, you unlock this completely new layer of meaning in the world. You're not just looking anymore, you're actually reading. We have gone all the way from a simple point to the grammar of complex design. Now you have the tools. You have the basic alphabet of this universal language. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to think about. As you go about your day-to-day, what new stories will you start to see written in the shapes all around you?